Hi there, everybody. I'm Destin Legary, and today I have the pleasure of talking with Brian Bloom and Jeffrey Negus from the Call of Duty team to ask questions about the Call of Duty campaign. Now, the first question I have is, how do you continue the story from where the last Modern Warfare left off in an interesting way?
Man, it's a great question and one we can answer 1,000 ways. So here's one. We know we have a pretty big responsibility when it comes to some of these characters and some of the lore that's surrounding, the older series, the idea of rebooting a beloved franchise and all of that. And with 2019, we really wanted to update things to make it modern, to make it relatable in a way that the audience would resonate with the audience. And in this game, we made it even bigger, even more modern, and I think in a lot of ways, we really tried to, especially from our side of the fence here, tried to come at it from a character perspective, how people feel about what things are happening, and tried to ground it through the lens of their experience as much as we could.
Right. Stepping back a bit, I'd add to that we kind of love our epilogues, and we have an incredible one. Hope everybody agrees, planned for this time around. But at the end of the last game, Price and Laswell were sitting at a cafe, and Price was waiting for the files that Laswell brought from General Shepard. He was going to stand up a new unit. At the time, there was only Bravo team. So he was going to call it 141. So in 2019, we hadn't really met. And now this is talking about the premium product and in campaign. We hadn't officially in campaign met Ghost or Soap. Their names were mentioned at the table, and he took the files back and said the rest are need to know, and they are. In terms of where we were at, we had an incredible opportunity, but a kind of a promise of a premise to deliver on no matter what, which was in the rethinking and in the reimagining and rebooting. It was time to put the team together and to introduce these two iconic characters and to think about how we would deal with that, and that this balance that we're really always thinking about, which is, how do we do our own, because we're fans too? How do we do fan service, but how do we make it original? How do we confound? How do we subvert expectation and not disappoint? So this, all of these things were in play as we, thought about where to go here. So we start with the whiteboard, and we start with where we are in the world. We rip from the headlines, not based on anything, but inspired by real world events, real people in real places doing real things. And Ghost and Soap had to be pulled into the mix. So that was the kind of the beginning of the building blocks.
Yeah, so Soap, he was introduced at the end of the previous game. How do you incorporate somebody like Ghost, though? It seems like he might be a little trickier because, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe he was just a skin in multiplayer, and now you're bringing him into the fold in Team 141. How does that work?
Well, Ghost has a fairly storied history when it comes to the older series, and I think with fans especially holds a special place in their hearts. So yeah, he's a guy that wears a mask. He's decidedly different than some of the other members of the team. But we look at that as a cool opportunity to be able to take a guy who is a lone wolf, a guy who'd rather be doing the job, alone because of the way that he sees it, that he can get the job done more effectively, and pit him against, somebody like Soap, who's, the most junior member of the squad, a guy that's a hard charger looking for a win, and put those two together. And again, coming at it from a character perspective and an arc perspective, what would happen there, and what do they have to learn from each other? And I think there's a really cool discovery here that would take what could otherwise be sort of a superficial, artificial like look of a thing, and actually make it grounded and through a person and through the eyes of a character that cares about something.
Yeah, I think it really boils down to taking a character, the way you described it, a skin, taking something that might have been a little bit more two-dimensional and still loved and awesome in that form, and saying, okay, well, what happens if we add more pillars to this? What happens if we add more dimensionality and a fuller spectrum to this individual? He's not probably going to say much. Well, what effect does that have on the team? And we work from this standpoint that story is character and character is story. So by bringing in an important character and thinking about his characterization, as Jeff was saying, and Ghost's effect on the team and the team's effect on him, and how reluctant is he to lead other men? Does he want to do everything on his own? And if that's a thing, which it is, what could we do in terms of an arc for that? Is there something Ghost can learn? It feels like he's learned all he needs to know. So how could we even subvert there and add something new and fresh to that and make that interesting? And yeah, this is, Ghost was, quite frankly, this was something that we really thought about the most, and glad you asked about it. And we thought about it the most because, or one of the things that kind of kept us up was, how do you take that person in the mask along with the ethos of grounded and real people in real places doing real things, and to figure out what the kind of barometric pressure of that truth might be, and how to contain it and still deliver something that's a little bit larger than life and special. I think we did a huge part of that was also, if I can say, casting. And this was a very unusual time for casting. They call them self-tapes. That word is a holdout from the past that stuck. But when we started looking at recordings, the issue that, we were looking at this one differently, because we didn't say, hey, put on a mask. So always, right? But we did some really interesting things once we heard, so the voice was very important, but we were looking at eyes, and we asked certain people like Samuel, who ended up playing the part, and really delivering. He's just amazing. And it was such a treat to work with him. And he had so much on his shoulders, and he handled it with flying colors. But to take this character, we were asking people to come very close to the camera, and we were asking them to stay still, and we were putting some of these constraints on them so that we could see what would their eyes do. And another part of this, maybe Jeff can go into, is we're making the most immersive game we've ever made because the tech has moved forward. So we thought, if we can get these eyes, in fact, not if, we need to be able to see these eyes in the right places, because they're going to do a lot of the talking. That's where the expression is going to come from, not only in game, but in pre-rendered.
Yeah, that's just to pick up. It was so important for that character to not only find the right person, and I couldn't agree more. Samuel absolutely rocked this character, brought new life to it, new vitality, and really gave it something that was a new dimension that we'd never seen before. That his self-tape ended up being like, man, it's this energy that came through. And even through the screen, this crazy thing that we have to, that's part of our whole world now. It really came through. And in our motion capture process, we have some new tech that allowed us to get performances in a way that we hadn't before, the most minute details, and be able to carry that all the way through to the final product. And in the end, because as Brian said, it was so important for Ghost specifically to be able to read his eyes. We had to be able to get close, one, so fidelity, but two, the nuance of the performance was so specifically important. It had to come through. And our partners over at Blur and our amazing team at IW were able to do some crazy things with the data that we were able to get, the chemistry that we were able to get on set between him and others, and be able to harness some of that, lightning in a bottle, and put it out into these cinematics and in the in-game cinematics as well. So we couldn't be more excited about what Ghost has to offer from a character perspective, and a new dimension to the performance and who he is.
While we're on the subject of cast, one of the characters a lot of people are curious about is Major Hasan Zyani, played by Ibrahim Reno, I believe. It seems like he has a different philosophy than One for One, obviously, because they're calling him a terrorist, right? But can you tell us a little bit more about his motivations and how he views Team 141 in this conflict that they're engaging within?
Sure. Well, we were glad that this piece, this kind of two-sided Hydra, kind of made it into the trailer for people to see, which is, and if you haven't, you said they see him as a terrorist, and we ended on him saying, I could say the same to you. And although I think we've seen and heard elements of that before in books and other entertainment products, and really in terms of the world at large interpreting current events and other things, the chance for somebody else to look at our hero, this idea that every, the bad guy is the hero in his own story. Sometimes this is a cliche or a trope or something that's thrown away or something that's hidden back in a bio somewhere. And we thought, well, what if we move that onto the front burner a little bit and just sort of put that out there, that feeling that, what does it do to kind of level set the, the good guys and the bad guys? And then what does it do to almost blur the line between them? In terms of his motivation, don't want to give too much away, but there is an early mission, being very, very careful here, because I don't want to spoil this for people who want to enjoy it, because again, this is something that, when we think that, the campaign is a sacred place to sit and have that experience and to enjoy it, and to not anticipate anything other than what it is you feel like you want to anticipate based on what you're seeing. So please bear with us as we carefully dance around this. But parts of this story are revenge. He's avenging something that some of our heroes are involved in. Again, they think they're doing the right thing. There is a tremendous amount of force used in a certain place against certain people that are involved in his team and his circle, and somebody very close and important to him in his chain of command. And as a result of that event, he is catalyzed, motivated, and animated deeply. He is going to, across the arc of this story, he is going to, in terms of the plot, he is going to bring to bear some things that he thinks were done to him and his faction and his army, and he is going to attempt to do those things or use some of those things back against us. It's a little bit to do with things coming home to roost to some extent. And, thematically, this story is about the company you keep. But we also ask a question, do you have to become the thing you're trying to destroy? And Hasan, again, not to give anything away completely, will be, there's an unholy alliance between he and another faction with similar interests, but vastly different capabilities. And when they plus up, they are greater than the sum of their parts. So our players have to work that much harder to overcome that adversity, to achieve their objectives, to prevent some of these plans from playing out. How did I do there, Negus? Did I answer it without answering, but still answering?
I mean, I feel like absolutely the only thing I would add, and you said it, but just to hit on it in a different way, I think a thing that was really salient about how we differentiate between the villains and the heroes in this story was building on the last game, which was finding your line. And I think building on that theme further in this game, as we saw in the trailer and as you were mentioning, when it comes to his motivations, or rather when it comes to his characterization, a thing that was really interesting to us was just to try and see how he would hold up a mirror and be able to explore both sides of things. The idea that every villain is a hero in his own story, but also that that there may be things that they have in common. There may be things that, like, this was part of making this story modern, I think, was trying to, I think a thing that we see in stories right now is not necessarily that you couldn't see where a villain might be coming from or someone who's opposing from you, not that you're completely different and not that things are unfounded necessarily, So there was something really salient in there for us that was really exciting to get to explore with this. And we definitely have places in this game where different parts of characters are exposed and explored because of that, because of their differences and because of the things they have in common.
Yeah, I had a conversation. I think you were part of it, Negus, with Ibrahim and who plays Hasan, and early on, and I think we were talking about, you know, a character having a question, just like a story does, and answering that question and seeing if we could find the answer. And I think the question we had talked about at the time and carried through the process in terms of his performance and in terms of writing it and acting it and directing it was, you know, if you can do it, meaning good guys, then why can't I? And I think the answer was, I can. And I think that, you know, that gets into this, do you have to become the thing you're trying to destroy? And that has a lot to do with his intention and motivation. And anyway, that's the sort of fortune cookie of the whole thing.
I got to mention one other thing too, which is that Ibrahim was an absolute joy to work with. This guy came so prepared and so passionate, having played characters, you know, that may be in the ballpark of this, but really gravitated towards and dug deep into who this guy was. Found ways to bring out a different side of things, and he'd never done motion capture before, so this was a cool learning opportunity for everybody, a cool, like, a spot for all of us to get onto the set and just like explore together and create some chemistry. And boy, he just jumped in head first, and I think made some really awesome stuff for this game. He was very cool to work with,
Great
and
choices.
really talented.
There are some actors who dial something in and they just have it, and there'll be nuanced differences in each performance, but for the most part, once they really find it, they're sort of swinging for that thing. And that's there are cases where that's perfect as well. Ibrahim was so interesting because he just found ways to keep it fresh every single time, and to move these things emotionally, and to press the words, and to kick the words around, and in some cases to even change the words, and you know, just to continue to find it and find it and find it. And part of that was that his character was so sure in terms of his motivation, in terms of his intention, but in terms of expressing it and expressing it thoroughly, and making sure that the message has been given. So he just found ways to just keep finding it. To keep working it. It was incredible to watch. His performance is terrific. Yeah, I think you'll enjoy it.
So what do you hope players take away from that? It sounds like you're talking about a villain who presents a moral quandary for people to consider. What do you hope a player takes away once they've completed the campaign?
Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
I was going to say, you know, it's an authored experience, but I think the beauty of the campaign, you know, we often talk about the campaign being, you know, we have such a gigantic community, but the campaign is this sacred thing that you do alone, sort of an audience of one at a time in the many millions. I think we don't like to kind of answer. I mean, we have ideas about the way some of these things net out, but what's most interesting about it is that the question is there and is posed, and we're not shying away from the answer. There are absolutely answers, but to even dictate what we think that answer is before people have experienced it, I think what's special about this, we think what's special about this is that this is a place where, you know, the FPS is an interesting thing because it's an authored experience. You're playing as Soap, you're playing as Gaz, you're playing as other people, which is an important part of this, and we don't want to give all of that away, but you play as some new people you haven't experienced before, and it's a chance for you to be Soap, but we try to be very cognizant of leaving room for you to be you still, to have an opportunity to consider whether that's play style, how you're prosecuting the target, where you're going loud, where you're going stealth, how you're infilling, you know, how rapidly you move through the map, what you explore, what if there's intel there, you know, are you interested in that? Do you want every little piece of the story? Do you want a YOLO? Do you want to run and gun? Are you, you know, there's room for you to do it your way, and there's also room for you to decide what you feel, and what you've taken in and what you've experienced. So this is something that we want our players to answer those questions for themselves and hopefully have some discussion.
Yeah, I'm totally with that. I definitely wouldn't want to presume to tell people what they should get from this thing. That's one of the awesome things about video games and movies and books and any media that you can consume. There's an element of it, of your interpretation, which I'm very excited to hear what people think. And I would just add that we want people to be engaged playing this. We want people to be immersed playing this. We feel like we've created the most immersive, the biggest game that we've done for Modern Warfare, and through that, thematically, I would just love. The thing that was so interesting to us is, again, going back to the huge cast that we have and the different characters that might see the exact same thing different ways. To keep it general, what I hope that players get out of this is a chance to maybe see something from a different perspective, to maybe look at something that they would have otherwise gone, yeah, I know exactly what I think about this, and flip that on its head and maybe subvert their own expectation about things. That would be my greatest hope for this game, and really anything. I mean, what's the point of doing a thing if it's not going to make you think a little bit?
Yeah, Hassan's not the only bad guy in this story. If you think he's a bad guy, or if you think what he's doing is wrong, and there's an opportunity with all of the characters, and some characters that you might not see coming and may not expect to have the ability to jam you. Your team can build you up; they can also bring you down. So there are places here where people have done things that you could interpret as, and this is something, again, that we would love for you to consider as you play the game, which is, hey, I wouldn't have done that, but he's got a point, or he's got a point, or they've got a point. So these are, if the takeaway is, I still want to go after them, but I'm not completely confused about where they're coming from. I just don't like it, or I want to do something about it, or it's a conflict I want to resolve, or I want to come out on top. So that's something that I think I'd be happy to fill in the answer there, which is, we want you to consider that their motivation, that their worldview, that their ideology is worth a listen.
Well, inversely, we also have 141. So what is this mission for them? Is this just a go stop bad guy X mission, or is there more meat to it than that for this team?
In the last game, one of the first assets that we put out for 2019, Price said, "War isn't black and white, it's gray." And this game builds on that idea. For 141, it's 141 is always going to be fighting for the good of people that can't defend themselves, and to try and get the right job done as they see fit. Try and take the right actions in order to help the right people. So I think 141 is definitely up against things in this story that they have never been up against before. They've been operating for the last 3 years as a tier 1 fire team, and they're definitely going to run into things in this story that they haven't seen before.
Yeah, as the plot unfolds and thickens, just who you can trust and who the bad guys are, and just who, in the way you described it, it's a whole lot more than bad guy X. And again, just don't want to spoil this thing, but the plot does thicken, and sometimes we need to look over our shoulder to see who's behind us, but we also need to look to see who's with us.
Well, let me ask you then a little bit more about actual crafting of this story within the game engine. How closely do you have to work with the gameplay team or the game design team to ensure the story beats are hit in a way that feels natural while a player is playing through the experience? Because based on the trailers, they seem blended incredibly well, where you're still in control, but everything looks very cinematic and driving you forward as a player. So how do you strike that balance when you're putting it on paper to seeing it in action?
This was a really delicate symbiosis. We definitely, it was massively collaborative, as most video games are. Um, there were certain parts of the road of the development where the story had to, be plotted out, and the game mechanics and prototypes needed to be plotted out. But as the development continues, those things have to be integrated together. The mechanics themselves don't have any purpose and meaning without the story to give it context, and the story doesn't have a mode of expression without the mechanics for the player to experience it. So it was ultra important to us. It was very important to us that those things were integrated as best they could be. And I think something in this game that everybody was really pushing towards was, how do we keep the player in core control? How do we keep core mechanics available to the player so that it doesn't feel like we're suddenly taking control away, unless that's something that's good for parity between the character and the player, to feel powerless or what have you. But to try and, as best we could, let the player still feel like they have the freedom to have the agency to do what they want to do within the confines of an authored experience, as this game is.
Jeff mentioned the word parity. We use this idea internally, player protagonist parity, the feeling that your mechanics, the systems, and the features that are available to you or not available to you, depending on when and where you are and what situation you're in, represent some sort of emotionality to them, that represent you're having an almost physical reaction in terms of what you can and can't do and where you can and can't do it, and to align those things in some way appropriately, or to keep them out of alignment in places where that's the feeling that the character would have. So we work so closely with designers on levels to find opportunities to do this and make sure that the circuitry is robust. And there are places, of course, the in-game and missions are much more iterative, but on the other side, we're dealing with, you mentioned, things that have a very cinematic look, and working with Blur, we get to make these movies, and within those movies, we have an opportunity to look more closely there. They're the kind of highest fidelity pieces of this. And we use those hopefully effectively to, if you are going to put the controller down, how much are you caring about what's happening, so that you don't feel you've been gypped or you've been interrupted or that control has been taken away, but that it's worthwhile to see what this movie is and to get up close and personal with the characters. And how vital is the information and the exchanges and the interactions and whatever it is that's happening in terms of the plot or storyline or characterization in those places, that you want to attend the movie. You want to be there, and you want to take the halo effect or the of those movies in terms of seeing the characters more closely, and now feel that as you move across the campaign or into the next mission. And so those stops, those kind of ports in the storm across the game, we worked very closely with Blur, and I think we've made some of the best looking, most exciting, and performance wise, and the lensing of them, and I hope they're written pretty well too.
I would say they were, and it was such a joy to be able to come to the set and create those flags in the ground in between the gameplay. to create real spaces with real people and create as grounded of a narrative experience as we could. And I absolutely I think we really relished the challenge of what I know is the widest variants of styles of gameplay and different gameplay mechanics. It's much grander than it was in the last game in terms of different experiences the player's going to have when it comes to mechanics, and that was a really unique challenge for us on the narrative team to find ways to pair that with the emotion and the context of the story, and vice versa, and work back and forth between that to create mechanics that would also inform the story and the emotion for the player as they went. So I couldn't be more excited about the results and can't wait for people to play it.
And what was your reaction to getting to see the story that you've written in these cinematics by Blur and just in action being played for the first time?
I watching the playtests and seeing where we have this great, we can see where people's eyes go on the screen, and like for somebody that like Brian will write the scene and then we'll come to the set and we'll sort of all figure out together like how the blocking works and those sorts of things, and then I'll get on a camera to lens things and put things in the right spot and really feel it with the actors. And what was so cool about this is what we captured on the stage in a way that we haven't before really did get pulled through every step of the process and translated through to the end product. And what we see on the screen at the end, Brian and I will look at each other, in this last phase, looking at some of this stuff and just go like, I mean, that just jumps right over the uncanny valley. That's real. That moment right there is real. And you have to do a double take. And we've heard from people that played the game like, I mean, I thought you went live action for these things this time. And I think, I mean, just on the cinematic side, I'm so proud of the work that we've done with Blur, and also all of the strong, writing that went behind these scenes, the deep digging that the actors did to get into the text and get into the characters and honestly, we didn't have a weak link in the bunch. Everybody came to work ready to do what they did so well. And these scenes are my favorite scenes that we've ever made.
We've heard this. This is another kind of cliche, and let's try to own it, but make it worthwhile. Which we've heard all of these. We've heard actors and directors and producers in interviews, and I'm sure you've heard this maybe twice today already before us. This is the greatest cast we've ever put together. We had such an amazing time together and all these things. Well, I think every time somebody's doing it because they're passionate about what they did, and if they think they did it well, that makes sense. And but our job on the narrative side of the house is to bring the carbon-based life into this largely digital medium. This is where the heartbeats and the voices and the elements of humanity, emotion, drama, feeling, relationships, chemistry are going to come through. And if there's nothing there to capture, you come barreling through the uncanny valley with a subpar product that it wasn't worth looking closely at a face if what it was saying wasn't meaningful and the performance wasn't dialed in and wasn't right and the lens wasn't right and the lighting wasn't right. And so again, all of these disciplines coming together, but it starts with, I think, what's on the page in a lot of ways, especially for the cinematics. It starts with a story, which is the entire game, a plot line, a storyline, a narrative. And those things are all different, and even weaving those things together. So when we shoot, even though we're using cinematics, and there are a few exceptions, we're still shooting it like a play. We're looking for a full take. We're looking for everybody to get everything right all at once, so that all of that magic, all of that chemistry, everything is there in one take. So we're not on a film, unless you were just doing a master and something incredible happened, or that was your style, or that was your choice, or you were doing it for effect, or it was all you had because of your budget. We've got the budget. We're very fortunate to have the budget, but the question is, using it effectively for cinematics is, we try not to cut into these things. We try not to edit them very much. Of course, we edit them in terms of choosing shots, but we try to pull everything from one take. Again, there are exceptions and there are places. Jeff can speak more to this, but this is all part of what you're seeing. It's sort of like when you hear that an album by a band was kind of played, you know, that was the, you know, what you're hearing on the record is the band playing live. I think we have the equivalent of that here in our cinematics in a lot of cases, and that gives them a little extra something special.
Yeah, and I would just add one other piece to this, which is what Brian was hitting on with like not trying not to cut into performances in order to retain the natural chemistry that was happening. There were several times throughout this process where it was, you know, kind of expected that that's what we would do, and we didn't have to. There were so many times here where you may watch one of these cinematics, and I won't tell you which ones, but you may see them, and it is literally one take all the way through. We just sat there and did it until it felt right, and like a play would do. We didn't define this is exactly where the shot's going to be every time. We let the actors find the spots that made them feel like that was going to best tell the story, and then we found the angles to support it. That I feel like that's anything that's going to be collaborative in that way. We had to give them freedom to be able to find the moments and then best capture. Our job was to capture those moments and bring them through to the finish line. I think that what we were able to do on the stage with the actors was really special.
That's awesome. I'm really excited to play. I'm being told we have to wrap up on time though. You guys have to run apparently to another thing. But real quick, last question, if you could answer in one sentence. If you could take Call of Duty anywhere and do a one-off, where would you take the franchise story-wise?
I've got it. Jeff,
I have one too. Well, yeah, I've got one too, but it's so mine would be this may be a boring answer, but mine would be to go back and tell an important origin of something.
Yeah, I'm going to say it. Ghost's origin story. Yeah, that's what I'd like to do, and there are others who would like to do that too. So we think that would be really interesting, and again, that's kind of where this interview started, right? That there's something about that character that's iconic, but the mask and some of those more superficial elements, as we've attempted to build them out here in our current release. Where did some of those things come from, and exploring that and looking at that would be something I think the audience would love, and we would love to get into.
He's a real guy that we've come to really care about in a different way, with a different dimension, with Samuel bringing him to life, and it's hard for us not to like jam on like, man, wouldn't that be cool?
Well, that's awesome. I'd love to see it, but we're out of time for today. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Jeffrey, for taking the time to chat with me today. And I can't wait to play more Call of Duty.
Thanks so much for your time, Dustin. Really appreciate it.